You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Well, folks, we're off to an exciting evening. I see I'm about 8 minutes late. When everything got ready to start, nothing happened. Well, it started playing the Lanterns intro, and it froze up, and that was that. I have no idea what happened. I restarted the program and then restarted the computer, and it looks like maybe we're broadcasting now. So appreciate your patience, and we'll try not to let that affect the rest of the show this evening. If I can get my dog to not get on my cords here. About pulled my headset off. Very good. Okay, Michael Murphy, Voice of Reason, Lanterns Media Network, Lanterns Radio, Lanterns.buzz, all that good stuff. Glad you're here with us. It's a beautiful evening. I'm sitting out on the porch, and I just had a big cold slice of watermelon that was out of my garden. And life doesn't get much better than this, and at least until I turn on the news. So here we go. Looking at a little bit of the news today. We're going to talk about we're going to get into some pretty serious stuff here a little bit later, but I want to look at some stuff that kind of piqued my interest in the news today. There was an incident in. Let's see, I'll have to see where it was, where a young man, a 16-year-old man in Detroit, tried to rob a man, a 16-year-old man tried to rob a 61-year-old man in a convenience store. The older gentleman had just recently gotten his concealed carry license. He's a musician. He got up this Sunday morning, he thought, I'd like to have a cup of coffee, and he walks down to the convenience store. Well, I don't know, how he noticed it or whatever, but the young man evidently saw the older gentleman had a weapon, and he picked him out, and he stuck a gun in his back, and he said, "Give me your gun." And the older fella, he played it pretty cool. It's on video. You can one place it is the Blaze, and does have the video where you can see it. He played it. The old gentleman played it pretty cool, and he says, "I'm a grandfather." He says, and I talked to him like I was a grandfather. He says, I told him, he says, "You don't have to do this. Let's not go there." And he worked with him, tried to talk him out of it, and he wasn't going to be talked out of it. And so as the old man said, he wanted my gun, so I gave it to him. He pulled his weapon and he shot the young man. He says, "I didn't shoot to kill him." He says, "I shot to save him." And the kid is alive. He left the store, and some friends helped him get him to a hospital, and then from there he's arrested and arraigned and all that. So anyway, long story short, always be prepared. I carry all the time. I'm carrying right now, and I don't expect anybody to walk in here, but you never know. The thing is you don't know when you're going to need car insurance, but you carry car insurance. We carry health insurance because we're required to by the federal government. We have fire extinguishers in our house. We have smoke detectors. We do all sorts of things out of a precaution, out of being prepared, being ready for things that we don't want to happen. And really, I see protecting yourself with a firearm is the same way. I don't view it as a right. I view it as a responsibility. And I saw another friend of mine had posted on Facebook. I saw a little bit ago as I was getting ready to go on air. I was reading a post, and evidently there was a shooting in a restaurant in South Carolina, where in the state where he lives, and he was commenting. He says evidently nobody in the restaurant was armed or prepared to do anything. So it's amazing. It's amazing to me how people just go about their lives without really thinking about things like that until it's too late. I'm a defensive driver. As an airline pilot, I was, very, very cautious. Like they say, there's no old, bold pilots. And there's just things like that I think is just incumbent upon us to take care of business, so to speak. And I don't ever want to shoot anybody. I've never had to pull my weapon, and I hope it stays that way. But we need to pay attention to these sorts of things and be aware and be where we can help out other people. Kansas is a state where we have what they call the Good Samaritan law and also the Castle Doctrine. I'm able to protect my property. I don't have to try to retreat. I'm not allowed to go after people. I'm not allowed to shoot them in the back or anything like that. But the bottom line is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, after Kansas first passed their concealed carry and they had the reciprocity with a few other states, the actual first shooting by a concealed carry holder was in defense of somebody. And it was a man, I believe, from Oklahoma, and I believe it was a convenience store in Topeka. And the man from Oklahoma was standing in the convenience store, and a guy came in and shoved a gun in the clerk's face and threatened to kill him. And the concealed carry holder pulled his weapon and ended the problem. We don't know what would have eventually happened, but those are the sorts of things that you don't wait and see. Next thing that caught my eye. And this is something that's becoming far, far too common. My wife worked in the school for 1 year. She worked as a para. I have several friends who are teachers. One is a principal. I've got cousins that are, I think for the most part they've retired from teaching, but I've got cousins that were teachers. What we're seeing going on with these kids is just outrageous. The point that they've been allowed to escalate to is unbelievable. And there's a video of a 16-year-old student. He punches. First of all, he gets in a discussion or a heated argument with his teacher. He shoves his teacher, and that's not enough. Then he punches in the face, and then when he goes down, he lands 4 or 5 punches. And there's people on the somebody's videoing it. So yeah, the film is out there. And so this sort of stuff is, to me, this is outrageous. Obviously, this kid ought to be charged with something fairly serious, certainly a felony. Teachers are basically, handicapped in the sense of they're not allowed to protect themselves. They're not allowed to touch the student. I'm sorry, I would give up my job if a student shoved me. That would be it. When he took a swing at me, he'd be on the floor. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. When I was in school, if you had dared swing at a teacher, and I had a couple of teachers, I think if you had swung at them, they probably would have killed you. I had a history teacher that had been a POW in Germany, and he was the weightlifting coach. He was not somebody to mess with, and I don't know. We had some kooky, crazy people when I was in school too, but nothing like this. There's a level of respect for authority, for whether you're talking police, teachers, boss, whatever like that used to sort of exist, and anymore it just seems to be gone. People just think that they are the greatest power on earth, and if anybody tries to get in their way, that's a problem. And we need to. This is going nowhere good. That's for sure. And I hope that this teacher is fine, and I hope that this young man pays a serious price and learns a valuable lesson for what he did. there's an interesting thing. The headline caught my eye, and I went, "What?" The headline is "Prominent Gun Rights Group: We Won't Defend the Presence of Firearms at Protests." And I'm thinking, okay. And actually, it's the Second Amendment Foundation, and it's one of my favorite gun rights lobbies and organizations. I actually like them better than the NRA. I think they're very solid. And so when I see this headline, and then the first thing I see that's who it is, I'm going, whoa, what's going on here? Well, what really comes out in the article is what they're trying to do is they're trying to come out with the idea that they're not saying that you can't be armed. What they're saying is that some people carry to make a political point. And we've seen that. We've seen people that open carry. They'll carry a rifle or a pistol in the open carry position. It's one thing that it's legal, and it's one thing that you just do it as a course of going about your daily business. It's quite another if you're trying to bring attention to yourself, and if you're trying to bring attention to the fact that you're armed. I open carry around my ranch, and when I go into my local community, now my local community, the population is 200, and I live about 5 miles out of town. So most people, most of the time I'm not seen, and it's not a big deal. When I go to town, the town that I call town is a city of around 50,000. Most people would call that a small town. To me, it's the big city. I have open carried there, but it's not what I normally do. I normally conceal carry, partly because, as that first article I read about the kid that wanted the guy's gun. Now, most likely that's not going to happen. But if your weapon is properly concealed, they're not going to know you got it. And so I view that as sort of one of two things. You're either a target or you're trying to make a point that doesn't necessarily need to be made. So I don't have a problem with their stance on this, and so hopefully they'll get this squared away. And it's an attitude thing. I wish people didn't feel like they had to be in your face, and I don't like the in your face attitude with anything. I don't like it when say for instance gay rights, people want to get in my face, LGBT whatever it is, want to get in your face. I don't like that any different or any more than if some heterosexuals got in my face about their sexual orientation and things. There are things that just don't need to be talked about like that, and I don't need it in my face. And this is something I guess I view it kind of as like the golden rule, doing unto others. Since I don't like things done in my face, I don't like to do things in other people's face. And so we'll let that go the way that is for right now. A feel-good story. The headline is, "They just need a little kindness. 10-year-old makes more than 50 lunches a week for the homeless." And here's a young man who I think this summer, the way I understand the story, had an opportunity to go to a summer camp. But he also had some other options. As one of his options was to do volunteer service, and he kind of got started on this deal. And so he puts together a sack lunch that has a sandwich, some fruit, and potato chips. And he also adds a note of encouragement, like "Have a nice day" or "Try to smile." And these are the sorts of things that go a long ways towards bringing us back to where we need to be. And if you've read my book, my novel Spare Time, I wrote it in a novel form, but the idea behind it was that we need to take our time to return to the people that we should be. And if we can do that in many ways, we will change this nation. It's been very clear that our nation has devolved through various and sundry things, and largely because, as our founders told us, that we need to be a moral and virtuous people. And as we've left that has also been the decline of our nation. I've watched, my dad was a minister, and he preached about things back in the 60s and 70s that I just kind of went, okay, whatever. And he was right. He saw the writing on the wall. He understood history. And he knew that as we took God out of the home, out of the family, everywhere else, and it's not just the fact that it's God, it's the goodness that's God. It's you don't have to believe in God to be good, but God is where good comes from, whether you want to believe that or not. When we look at history, nations that have been godly have not been a problem. It's the ones who have been ungodly. Now, I didn't say religious. I said godly. Notice that there have been plenty of people, and there have been plenty of wars started on behalf of God, or in the name of God, or in the idea of following God. And that's not what I said. So I think we need to return to some things like that, and our nation will be a lot better if we can start doing that. And this young man is a perfect example of that. I'm going to take a short break here, and then we will pick back up here in just a few minutes. And I said a few minutes. It was actually probably about 35 or 40 seconds, but it gives me a chance to rest my vocal cords for a couple of seconds and get a quick drink of water. And once again, I appreciate you being with us here at Lanterns Media Network and Voice of Reason, Michael Murphy. The next thing I want to talk about is actually going to lead into one of our main topics for the evening. There's an article about a couple of kids that went to a black university, and they wore "Make America Great Again" hats. I sort of, in a way, view this as sort of along the lines of what I mentioned as far as the carrying the guns in an open manner in an effort to flaunt or to irritate or agitate or draw attention. These teens went to Howard University, which is a black university, and they were told in the lead up that they really shouldn't wear any Trump supporting clothing. It just wouldn't be a good idea. Now, you and I are probably on the same page in the sense of I believe it's my right to do lots of things, but maybe it's not a good idea. And when you do something like this, you are trying to get in somebody's face, and this is sort of the thing. And I think they got the response that they wanted. I think they were looking for confrontation, and they got it. Sort of like the bully when he picks on somebody, he's wanting his victim to lash out, and sometimes they do. So that's kind of what was going on here. They wear their hats, and they show up there. They were warned several times. They weren't told they couldn't do it. They were just warned that they should avoid inflammatory behavior. They were told you can't wear that to a historically black college. They ignored it like we didn't say it at all. The article here says that another student revealed that other people warned the white girls before entering the cafeteria that it wouldn't be a good idea to wear their hats into the facility. Before we got in the cafe, we told them to take off their hats. I had a pit in my stomach. I knew something was going to happen. They ignored us. They took matters into their own hands and kept them on. Now, like I said, this is the sort of thing that nobody got hurt, or anything like that. But it just started something that just didn't need to be started. And I don't know why people have to be in your face with things. Once again, they have every right to do it. as well as the students at Howard had every right to lash out at them. I mean, we don't go through our life with a right to not be offended. So the people at Howard do not have a right to not be offended, and these young girls didn't have a right to not be attacked verbally. So anyway, this is just sort of thing that I think we need to kind of be thinking about. We're getting into the situation in our society where things are really getting out of hand. There's a lot of, everything's kind of, people are really on edge and stuff like that. And so to do this sort of thing is just looking for trouble. And there's just no point in it. We have other ways to make our point. Okay? Like the young man who makes sandwiches for the homeless. Okay? Now, on to one of the things I wanted to talk about for tonight. This is, like I said, this kind of leads into some of the other stuff that I want to do. I published an article today that entitled "Get a Grip," and it's on Lanterns.buzz, and I hope you'll go in there and check it out. And if you have not gone if you're on Facebook and haven't gone there already, I hope you check out not only Lanterns.buzz and all like that, but also I've got a page that I hope you'll like. It's a Michael Murphy Voice of Reason. I hope you'll go there and like that page. And all my articles are shared there as well. I also share every day. I share sort of a quote of the day, generally something from one of our founders, but not always. But I try to always make it pertinent to our society and to our nation. And I also do a couple of this days in history. Generally speaking, it's back Revolutionary War era, although I think it was yesterday was the anniversary of the Mount Vesuvius eruption that destroyed Pompeii, and that was one of them. So there'll be different things on there. Once in a while, it's something from the Wild West, from the 1800s, early West stuff going on. Anyway, what I wanted to look at in this article, I started off talking about a young girl who she's just now 18, and she was befriended by an older man when she was 15. And he drugged her. He gave her, put something in a drink or some food or whatever like that. And when she woke up, she was naked and being raped. And there were several men in the room, and they each took their turn at her. And then the man that had taken her originally took her across the country where the abuse had continued. Ultimately, when she reached her destination, she was kept in a dark basement and in chains when she was not being used. In time, she was sold to a gang leader and used as his personal girl, and also forced to prostitute herself. And it was at this time, while she was acting as a prostitute, that she got arrested. And she told the police who she was, what her age was, and how long she had been held. She is actively working to help others who are in her situation, working on getting her GED and starting her life over. And when her captors come to trial, she is going to testify against them. And then I mentioned another girl who is now 21, who was taken at a young age to Mexico, and she was held and forced to have sex with as many as 60 men a day for 5 years. I can't even imagine. She was rescued by a nonprofit organization that seeks out these children, and she's now very active. She works with this organization, and she helps pursue these people who take and use and abuse children. And then another case that I mentioned was a Chinese woman who was taken as a work slave. She was brought over to America in a cargo container full of other Chinese citizens, and sold to work in a large commercial laundry cleaner business. For 5 years, she was restrained by chain around her neck and around her waist. She still carries scars from those chains and will for the rest of her life. She also is actively working to stop this practice. There's estimates there's as many as 30 million people held as slaves around the world, and by the way, that's much greater number than was going on back in the 1700s and 1800s in that time. So, lest you think that slavery was the big problem back in the 17th and 18th century, or 18th and 19th century, excuse me, then you got another thing coming. They say there are as many as 60,000 held as sex slaves, or as workers in the United States. In some cases, these workers are paying back a debt. We're aware of, like in Mexico, when the coyotes bring people up, if they can't be paid, then they'll have to work for somebody until they can earn the money to pay back the coyote. There are also, I guess it's really big or bad or whatever in Virginia, and a lot's not done because the Saudi government is very involved in this. It's very typical for some of these Middle Eastern countries, and especially Saudi Arabia, people who have families over here, they will get a young girl basically as a slave who lives in their home and takes care of their children and takes care of their house, and they have no option. Lots of times their families are threatened and all like that. So anyway, I wanted to bring this up because this is an ongoing problem in this world, and you can think that, well, the problem with slavery was back, and Abraham Lincoln and all like that took care of it and all that's over. No, it's not. You may remember when the young what's her name, Holloway, that disappeared in Aruba. Remember, one of the thoughts was that might have happened to her rather than being killed was that she was sold as a sex slave. Those things are very real, so don't think it doesn't happen. But the point I was making here is these examples of these people right here that I gave, and there are many of them. Would they not have every right? I mean, they've had a lot of their lives stolen. Their innocence has been destroyed. And wouldn't they have a right to feel bitter? And wouldn't they have a right to sit back and say, the world owes me because of what I've been through. This country owes me for what I've been through. And yet they don't. And then we look at some of these colleges. College students need safe rooms with crayons and coloring books and Play-Doh, because they might see a Trump sign, or "Make America Great Again," or they might see a conservative icon. Somebody might have an elephant on their hat, or whatever like that. Or worse yet, they might see a historical statue that represents something that really just destroys them and gives them a meltdown. Now, I'm sorry. It's time to grow up, people. It's time to realize that the world doesn't revolve around you. It's time to realize that you're merely a cog in this big, huge piece of machinery, and that the machine isn't going to stop just because you don't want to play along. These ladies in this example I gave in this article have every right to be bitter, have every right to demand all sorts of stuff. But what are they doing? They're picking up their marbles, and they're going to town, and they're going to take it to them, and they're going to prove that they can't be beaten down. And I think that's kind of what's going on here. And part of the problem is these people who are the snowflakes, the people who are upset about the statues and things like that, they're being played. There are larger players in this game. And we need to understand that these issues that exist out here, like the statue deals and some of those things like that, yes, they're important. And yes, we need to fight against those sorts of things. We can't just let them run roughshod over us. But we have to understand that this is a symptom of a much, much deeper problem. Once again, we have become a nation without morals and virtue. We have become a nation without personal responsibility. And until we can start changing that, and then also get to some of the deeper issues of a huge government that is just so bloated it can't possibly function properly, the fraud that exists, the waste that exists, the abuse that exists, the growing regulations, the unbridled spending, and the taxes, keeping or losing a statue in the end is not really going to matter if we can't address those other issues. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back shortly for the second half of the show.
You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Well, welcome back. Michael Murphy, Voice of Reason. Glad you're with us. Lanterns Media Network and Lanterns.buzz. Once again, encourage you to go check out the other broadcasters there, and also the other writers. Great articles that are there every day. And hope you'll I can't talk. Hope you'll take advantage of that great resource. I did a video last week that was entitled "Prayers, Crosses, and Statues," and I was sort of making a little bit light, maybe, and talking about this issue that's ongoing, and kind of ties in with the article about as far as getting a grip. And we need to. I hope you'll go take a look at that video. It's on my YouTube channel, Voice of Reason, and if you haven't subscribed to that, I hope you do. These are the sorts of things that are just dragging our nation down. We're just getting lower and lower and lower. And we spend all of our time on these stupid issues while the stuff that really matters gets ignored. And that's, I think, by design. And so I think we need to start paying attention to some things. And once again, like I said before, we need to look at the bigger picture. And we do not need. I'm not saying we need to ignore the fact that these statues are being torn down. We've been through the thing with prayers in schools and in public areas. We've been through the thing with crosses on hills and stuff like that. And whether it's a menorah or a nativity scene in a public square, and now the statues. Those are attacks, but those need to be fought back at. But those are not the problem. The problem is this departure from proper decorum and working with each other and caring for each other. And anyway, that's that. We're moving on now. We're going to talk about presidents. One of my favorite presidents to hate is Woodrow Wilson. I don't know if how many of you may know this or not. And what brought this up to not my attention, but what brought this out to make me start thinking about it is there's talk, and I'm sure you've heard about it, that President Trump needs to be impeached. And you go, well, impeached for what? Well, they think he's not fit. He's not fit to be president, and that's spelled out in the 25th Amendment of the Constitution. Excuse me. And therefore, we need to take him out. Well, I'm going to go back into a little bit of history of this so we can kind of talk about it. The 25th Amendment was not ratified until the 1970s. So we didn't have really a clear succession of to the presidency until then. Constitutionally, when Kennedy was shot, it was just sort of an assumption that the vice president would take over, but that wasn't early spelled out, as crazy as that may sound. The 25th Amendment goes in. I think there's about 4 parts to it, and it goes into the idea of spelling out the secession and why, and what brings it about. There's permanent and there's temporary as well. Woodrow Wilson, there have been a number of times when a president maybe was seriously ill or having surgery or any number of things, when they were incapacitated to where let's look back, for instance, when Ronald Reagan was shot and he was in surgery. Nothing was done. Nobody became the vice president. Did not become acting president while he was down. Nothing happened, and so, but had it, he was there. But there have been a number of occasions when there was a serious situation, and Wilson, certainly comes to mind with that, because Woodrow Wilson really had pretty terrible health. Even by the time he had a stroke in 1896, he did not become president until 1915. So we have to understand that he did not have good history of health. I said 1913. Excuse me. He was 1913 is when he was inaugurated. But his medical history shows numerous strokes. Like I said, the first one in 1896. He had one in 1904, 1906. 1907, 1908, 1910. And then in April of 1913, not long after he was sworn in, he had an attack of neuritis that involved his right upper limb. In a year later, in May of 1914, he had abnormal retina arteries. In May through September of 1915, had episodes of transient weakness in his right hand. Well, that's an indication of stroke and bad circulation and problems like that. He was by the end of his tenure, he was not seen. From 1915, he had episodes of severe headaches that lasted for days. They're guessing that maybe those might have been due to uncontrolled hypertension, high blood pressure. In September of 1919, he was having severe headaches, double vision, and signs of a weakened heart. And on September 25th, he developed a transitory weakness in the left side of his body. He suffered a catastrophic disabling stroke on October 3rd of 1919. And it's been recounted in multiple sources, including an entire book on the subject. The most serious illness ever suffered by a sitting president. He had had headaches before becoming president, but presidential physician Cary Grayson ascribed the stroke to thrombosis, stating that it was not hemorrhagic. Wilson's condition was hidden from his cabinet and from the vice president and from the public, and this could only be done by physically isolating him. Some members of his cabinet were uneasy. On October 5th, ex-President Taft wrote to A.L. Lowell. Secretary-Treasurer McAdoo says the president is in a state of collapse, that in his mind is clear, but he's so weak that his doctors would not permit him to discuss or think about any of the matters. He says he would like to help, but he's in a delicate situation, being the son-in-law of the president. Taft was no fan of Wilson, but it's interesting that an ex-president in the opposing political party would act on behalf of the people. After his stroke, Wilson was driven around his car, and he even had his Secret Service go after some people he thought was speeding. So we can see maybe he had pretty well lost it. His wife essentially was acting president. She would go talk to him. She relayed messages, and who knows how capable he was of responding and governing. What we know is that, and of course, and he died, I think in 1921, something like that, 1922. Anyway, this brought about, this and some other incidents brought about the idea that we needed a chain of succession, and so the there goes the wrister. I don't know if you heard it or not. The idea that we had we had to worry about what was going on with our president, and so all this stuff kind of was taking place. Really, all this kind of came about the time that Nixon was resigning, and of course Spiro Agnew had been the vice president, and Gerald Ford became vice president, and then of course ultimately became the only sitting president who was never directly elected. So quite interesting there. But what's the point of all of this is that when people are looking at this, what is the purpose of the 25th Amendment? The purpose of the 25th Amendment is to have a way of succession. But we don't typically look at the Constitution as ways of getting our way. If it was, we would have national reciprocity for our Second Amendment rights. It's interesting how people will look at things. It's time to take another break here before this final segment, and so we're going to take a short break, and then we will be back momentarily. Okay, thanks for that. You've probably heard my voice cracking a little bit. I'm not sure why. My throat seems to be really dry, and so that drink of water helps a lot. There have been some articles written. There are people calling actively for the impeachment of Donald Trump. Like him or not, he's the president. Now, I didn't care for Barack Obama as a president, and I felt that there were grounds for impeachment for him, but grounds of things of his actions. And I also understand that the reason that nobody took any move for that was multifold. First of all, there's enough progressives in the Republican Party that they're not necessarily in disagreement with what a lot of Obama did. They might have been in disagreement with the way he did it, but the bottom line, we watch it the way they're dealing with the repeal of health care. They want it. They want that control. We watch as the IRS runs roughshod over private citizens, taking their property with no due process, and they do nothing to stop it. That tells me that they actually like having that power. And they don't want, progressives and most politicians do not want the power residing in the people. But understand clearly that's the way the Constitution was written. The sovereign, when you look at say like a monarchy, like what we threw off in Great Britain, the sovereign was the king. Well, who's the sovereign in our government, form of government? It's the people. Now, if the people were to decide that a man was unfit, but we look at the fact that somebody's unfit, we've got high crimes and misdemeanors for impeachment. We're not really sure how those are defined. I mean, we can look historically and see how they're defined, and we have a good idea of what they are. But to say somebody's unfit, what's he done? He hasn't attacked anybody. He hasn't let things go. He hasn't refused to do his job. Those would be sorts of things that maybe you might go in and say, okay, well, we need to take him out based on the 25th Amendment. I mean, understand that's not an impeachment. They're calling for impeachment based on the 25th Amendment. But understand the way the 25th Amendment is written is that the president's cabinet and the vice president are the ones that take action, not the people, and not the House of Representatives, and not the Senate. So we need to pay attention to some things like that as we listen to some of these. And I'm just going to say it, they're morons. People are absolute morons who hate somebody enough that they'll violate the Constitution, they'll violate laws, rules, regulations, or whatever to get their way. And that's ultimately what's the problem in our nation. We've lost personal responsibility. We've lost the idea that we have a rule of law. We watched the administration the last administration. We watched them ignore laws that they didn't like. I'll be the first to admit I believe that a lot of the drug laws are foolish, and we've put a lot of people in prison over stupid things. And when something grows naturally, to tell people that they can't grow it and that they can't use it, I think is absurd, and I think that's the height of tyranny. Now, that being said, I've never used any of that stuff. Okay, so I'm not wanting it. I'm not wanting it because I want to use it. I'm wanting it because it's the right thing to do. And we use government as a stick, and I'm tired of that stick being thrown my way. And I don't know about you, but there are ways to go about. There's ways to go about blocking that stick and maybe taking the stick away from the people that have it. This is not the way to do it. And gathering people in the street, and well, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, the white supremacists, KKK, Antifa, BLM, that's not the way that works. What that does, what that accomplishes, is exactly what you're seeing. It gets people worked up. A few people are going to get hurt. A few people are going to get killed. It could even devolve into something almost like a civil war, and to where a lot of people get hurt and killed. But that's what we've got, and we're going to have to be careful about those sorts of things. As we look at this 25th Amendment, understand that, and I invite you to read it. I mean, just go in there and read it. None of these things are laborious. The 25th Amendment has 4 sections and 5 paragraphs. I could read it all, but I'm about out of time. We need to make ourselves knowledgeable about what our government is supposed to do and is able to do. And we need to learn to be putting our foot down. Yes, we need to put our foot down against people who want to remove statues, but we also need to put our foot down against those who would force their will on us using the power of government. My time's up. I'm sorry we got off to a rocky start. Shorted you a few minutes, but that's the way it goes. It's a great day, and I hope that you're having a great one as well. God bless America, and God bless you all.